I was 23 and just starting a new job in the city. Money was tight after graduation, and most apartments in close neighborhoods were out of my budget. That's when I found this online listing for a room in a quiet residential area in the outskirts of the city. The landlord was exclusively seeking female tenants, and the price was almost too good to be true for a single furnished room with all the utilities included. A bit skeptical, I connected with the landlord over the phone. She said her name was Marlene, and she was a retired neurosurgeon. She lived alone in a 3-bedroom house and preferred women who could keep her company and wouldn't make her feel uncomfortable. On the video call, Marlene seemed nice enough, maybe a little eager. She kept saying how excited she was to have a young woman in the house again and that it had been too quiet since her last tenant moved out. I moved in on a Saturday. Marlene was waiting outside when I pulled up and hugged me immediately. She held on a little too long and said she was so happy I was finally here. The room was nice and clean, with fresh paint. She'd put flowers on the dresser and said she wanted to make me feel at home. The first few days were fine. Marlene hardly did anything besides odd community services, so she was around a lot. I didn't mind at first, but she began to become overly friendly rather quickly. She touched my hair when we passed in the hallway and tell me how beautiful I was. She'd ask what products I used. She insisted we eat dinner together every night, said it was lonely eating alone, and that she loved having company. I tried to be polite and said yes a few times, but it quickly became an expectation. She'd also compliment everything I wore and would stare constantly. Many times, I'd look up from my laptop and catch her watching me. She'd smile like she hadn't realized she was doing it. At night, it got worse. I'd be in my room with the door closed, and I'd look up to see her standing in the doorway, grinning. I started locking my door at night, but the feeling wouldn't go away. One night, I decided to test something. I pretended to be asleep and left my door cracked just enough to see if she'd come by. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hall. Through my half-closed eyes, I saw her silhouette in the doorway. She stood there for maybe 15 minutes before she moved closer. She crouched down beside my bed. I could hear her breathing and smell her perfume. She purred how pretty I was up close, and how she just couldn't wait to feel all of it. My skin crawled, but I kept my eyes closed and breathing steady. I pretended I was still asleep. Eventually, she left, but I didn't sleep the rest of that night. First thing the next morning, I ordered a tiny hidden camera, the kind that passes for a phone charger, and set it up in my room, angled toward the hallway. The plan was simple. I'd quietly track Marlene's movements for the rest of the day, just until I could find somewhere else to live. That night, I locked my door and went to bed with my phone next to me and the camera app open. At 2:14 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the app and saw Marlene crawling in the hallway outside my door on all fours. My door was locked, but I watched in horror as she pressed her face against the gap at the bottom, trying to peep inside. She stood up and tried the handle. When it didn't open, she lingered for a bit, staring directly at the camera, and waved. Then, she turned around and crawled back down the hallway. I couldn't breathe or move. I just stared at my phone screen, trying to process what I'd just seen. The next morning, there was a knock at my door. It was Marlene, and she was holding a bouquet. She said we needed to talk, and she could tell I was pulling away. She said she didn't want to lose another girl like last time. I didn't open the door. I told her through it that I was getting ready for work. She stood there for a long time before she finally left the flowers outside my door and walked away. I called in sick to work and started packing immediately. I didn't have another place lined up or any kind of plan. I just knew I needed to leave. By the time Marlene got back from wherever she'd gone that afternoon, I I was already loading the last box into my car. She came outside asking what I was doing. I told her I had a family emergency and had to move back home immediately. She started crying and said I couldn't leave. She said we'd been so happy together and that I was just like the last girl. She said she couldn't go through this again. I got in my car and locked the doors. She stood in the driveway, watching me pull away, still sobbing. I stayed with a friend for 2 weeks before I found a new place. Never went back for my deposit. I just wanted to be far away from her. That was 8 months ago. I still think about it sometimes. I wonder what happened to the last tenant. Did she leave too? Or did something else happen? I reported it to the police and showed them the camera footage. They said it was creepy, but not technically illegal. They said unless she'd harmed me or threatened me directly, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I file for a restraining order if I felt unsafe, but I didn't. I just wanted to forget all about it. But sometimes, when I'm walking downtown, I swear, I see her standing across the street staring, or in the grocery store 2 aisles over watching. I tell myself I'm being paranoid and that she wouldn't follow me, but I can't shake the feeling that she's still watching. I was 19 when I moved to the city for university. My parents lived in a small village about 3 hours away, and student housing was expensive. My father suggested I stay with an old college friend of his who was a professor of psychology. I met Evan the day I moved in. He was polite and soft-spoken, maybe in his early 40s. He showed me to my room, which was already furnished, and told me I could use the kitchen and bathroom freely, but asked me to stay out of the basement. He said he kept research materials down there and didn't want anything disturbed. The first week was fine. Evan's car was usually gone during the day, and we didn't interact much. He'd leave notes on the kitchen counter about groceries or bills, and I'd leave rent in an envelope by the coffee maker. Soon, I started noticing things that felt off. Evan always cooked more food than one person could eat. I'd come home, and there'd be several plates drying in the dish rack. He'd tell me he had a colleague over for lunch, but I never saw anyone. When I did laundry, I'd sometimes find clothes in the washer that weren't mine or Evan's. Once, I found a pillowcase with stains that looked like dried blood. When I asked Evan about it, he said he'd cut his hand changing a light bulb in the basement. He showed me a bandage on his palm. One night, I woke up thirsty and headed toward the kitchen. That's when I heard soft pounding from the basement. At first, I thought maybe a stray animal had gotten in somehow, but the pounding continued with a steady rhythm. I crept to the basement door. Just as I reached for the handle, a voice cut through the darkness. Evan was standing at the end of the hall, backlit by his bedroom doorway. He asked what I was doing. I tried explaining I'd heard something down there. He said it was just old pipes knocking when the heat kicked on. He reminded me that the basement was always off limits. I started to say something, but he cut me off and repeated the basement was off limits. He waited until I nodded, then went back to his room. I needed to know what was in the basement. Next day, Evan had a faculty meeting. I watched him leave and waited 10 more minutes to be sure. The basement door was locked, but I'd already snuck the keys in the morning when Evan was in the shower. I opened the door. The stairs were wooden and old. At the bottom was a single dim bulb hanging from the ceiling. The basement was unfinished with a concrete floor and exposed pipes. In the corner was a mattress on the floor with a crumpled blanket covering most of it. Next to it was an IV stand with an empty bag hanging from it. There was a chair and a small table with pill bottles. On the wall was a framed photo of Evan and a woman, smiling with their arms around each other. The blanket on the mattress moved, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. The blanket shifted again, and I saw a woman, thin and pale, with eyes half open. She stared at me, but didn't seem to really see me. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. It was the woman in the photo. I heard the front door open upstairs. Evan had returned early. Maybe he'd noticed the keys missing. I ran upstairs without thinking. I could hear him in the kitchen. I made it to my room and locked the door. Seconds later, I heard his footsteps in the hallway. He stopped outside my door and tried the handle, but it was locked. He knocked and said my name quietly, asking if I was home. I didn't answer. He knocked again and told me he knew I was in there. Said we needed to talk. I grabbed my phone and backed toward the bathroom. Our rooms shared a bathroom with 2 doors on opposite sides. I locked the bathroom door from my side and opened the window. It was a first-floor window, just a short drop to the grass below. I climbed out and ran. I could hear Evan trying my bedroom door, his voice getting louder, telling me to open up. I kept running until I was 2 blocks away, then called 911. I told them everything. The dispatcher told me to stay where I was. I sat on the curb shaking and watching the street for police cars. They arrived 15 minutes later and went into the house while I waited outside with an officer who asked me questions I could barely answer. 20 minutes later, they brought out the woman on a stretcher. She was conscious but weak. The paramedics took her away. They brought out Evan in handcuffs after that. He looked at me as they put him in the car. His eyes were filled with hatred and anger. I stayed with a friend that night and gave my statement at the police station the next morning. The officers told me the woman was Marissa Mercer, Evan's wife. She'd been reported dead 3 years ago. Heart failure, the death certificate said, but there'd never been a body. Evan claimed he'd had her cremated. In reality, he'd kept her in the basement. The investigator said Marissa had tried to leave him after she caught him cheating and wanted a divorce. But Evan wouldn't have it. He faked her death and kept her sedated in the basement. Marissa was in the hospital for weeks. The drugs had done damage, but she survived. She confirmed everything and said she'd tried to escape once early on, but he'd caught her. After that, he'd kept her medicated almost constantly. The pounding I'd heard was her. One of the few times she'd been conscious enough to try signaling for help. Evan was charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and fraud. It has been years, but I still think about all of it sometimes, and think about all the ways it could have ended differently. And each version freaks me out, even more.